The story begins with the abandoned princess telling us that she has nothing and her only hope is that she can escape from the imperial palace, that someone will rescue her, and she will leave the palace with gratitude in her heart. Going back 5 years, we learn that the heroine, Her Majesty Aristana, has been accused in court because all the witnesses pointed to her, and now she must pay for her sins. The princess said that no one could accuse her, and the emperor, who had not expected such an answer from her, asked if she would confess to having killed the prince. The girl replied with equanimity that she doesn't admit her guilt. She really didn't kill anyone, and the emperor knows she's innocent. It's just being done to see if the pretender to the throne is competent enough. The heroine reiterates that she did not hurt or kill Prince Zegwan, and from her reflections, we learn that Zegwan was the only one among the many pretenders to the throne who was close to her. But at some point he became aggressive, and the girl could not get along with him. At this time, someone from the crowd, not believing the princess, turned to the emperor, saying that the girl should receive the punishment she deserved, but His Majesty only looked at the accused without uttering a word, disappointed that his favorite pretender to the throne would not be able to get out of the difficult situation. In the meantime, the mud continued to pour down on her, and the girl wondered what she had been living for all this time. From her memoirs, we learn that her mother died after wasting all her money, her brother died hating her and blaming her for her mother's death, and the emperor left her without any remorse. Once again remembering all the tragic events of her life, the princess came to the conclusion that she had simply lived the life she had been given, but she had nothing left. She had always wanted to be a proud daughter and sister, tried not to be inferior to her brothers, but it was all in vain. And then, finally, the cruel sentence was passed. Aristana Iogrante was sentenced to 2 years forfeiture of her title, to work in the dirtiest parts of the palace, and she was allowed only the bare minimum of necessities. The emperor, who had been watching the poor girl all this time, suggested that she should say one last thing, to which the girl, after a little thought, said with an absolutely serious and unwavering look that she hoped she would have decent conditions. The crowd reacted very violently to her words, thinking that she had gone mad, but she only wanted to rest. After the unexpected words of the princess, the emperor, not reacting to them in any way, ordered to lock the criminal in the underground prison, and the servants, obeying him, seized the condemned woman by the hands and led her away. Accompanied by the servants, the girl meets a handsome guy, and we learn that he is Prince Kilstein Iogrante, who, after the condemnation of the princess, believes that he has become the main character in this story. But the girl is determined to regain her position and leave the palace, and so she must be patient. As she passed a guy with a smug grin on his face, the guy insincerely sympathized with her and told her that her wings had finally been clipped. The prince's words enraged the princess, and she drew her sword and attacked the offender, whose face was still smiling, but the servants managed to protect him in time, and he was not hurt. The enraged Aristana fell on her knees. Her hands were now cuffed together, and she, again seized by the servants, was led away, angrily admitting her defeat to the prince, who had lastly said he would wait for her. The poor girl was led to the stables, where they finally uncuffed her and told her that they hoped the former princess could reign here as well. Aristana's indignation was interrupted by the arrival of the old man, who without further ado began to give her instructions. Get some water and tidy up the place. Deciding not to resist and heading for water, the former princess thought that she knew that everything would be like this, and that the imperial family changes its attitude very quickly. We learned that the girl was loved by the emperor only a few days ago, and now it seems to her that it was all a lie, though she tried her best because she wanted to be recognized, and she sincerely accepted everyone's kindness. There was not a soul on her side on the day of the trial, however, and smiling at her own thoughts, the girl thought that now Prince Kistain, if he saw her, would like the sight of her. Having finished all her business, Aristana asked to be given at least a good bed, but naturally no one would even listen to her, and now she had to make do with what she got. The former princess turned around sharply as she heard a sound behind the ajar door and found the food, the tray of which had just been dropped to the floor. She had hard stone-like bread and liquid soup for dinner tonight. Such a set made her admit that she had indeed hit rock bottom. The next day, she was sweeping the ground when suddenly the old man who was in charge of the place where she was working came up to her and politely asked her to get rid of the weeds that grew thickly behind the castle. Aristana agreed, and her grandfather, noticing that she was smiling and had left the scissors behind, suggested that her subordinate had lost her mind. When she reached the place where the weeds grew, the girl, once again remembering the old man's order, lit a match and threw it on the ground, thinking that this way the fire could spread to the imperial palace, and thought that she would like to burn everyone in the castle in the same way. However, her plan failed. Very soon, random passers-by noticed the fire and realized that the girl wanted to set fire to the castle, so they immediately grabbed her and took her to the chief of guards. Standing with her head down guiltily, Aristana listened to the accusation that she had made up a ridiculous pretext, as if she were trying to get rid of weeds, but had set the fire herself. Then she was asked if she had done it on purpose, to which she indifferently replied that she would not have been believed if she had denied it. Later, it was announced that it looked like an accident, according to the statement of the chief of guards, and the girl was released, promising to report the incident to the imperial family and listen to their opinion on the matter. As she prepared to sleep on her bed again, the girl thought about the emperor's order for her to be watched by guards for 2 months, and glancing at the sleeping guard assigned to her, noted that they had sent extremely irresponsible guards. Aristana impatiently noted that she was starting to lose her temper being here, and suggested that perhaps she didn't need to hold back any longer, and that she'd be fine either way. The next day, the girl came to the stables and saw people trying to catch the horses, which somehow all ended up in the same place. She, completely uninterested in their affairs, wrote, "I won't leave you alone," on one of their walls with horse feces, which provoked a violent reaction from those around her. The person watching thought it was done by the same people who were trying to catch the horses, while the girl, satisfied with her maliciousness, pretended that it didn't concern her at all. 6 months later, we hear a dialogue between 2 irritated stable workers about how the gray-haired girl is constantly doing something unfair and that it's just not worth paying attention to. Hearing one of them call her a brat in a frenzy, Aristana didn't react, but she had to admit that accepting the life of a loser was easy enough. But it was still hard to eat that chowder. It was only now that she realized that a poor life was a lot of trouble. Thinking once more about the food she now had to eat every day, the girl made the decision to think of something to get out of here, because she wouldn't survive a few months here, let alone 2 years. She was distracted from her own thoughts by voices outside. Listening and looking out of the window, Aristana heard gossip about the prince from the maids working in the imperial palace, and noted with despondency that the gossip would never stop, no matter where she found herself. After thinking for just a second, the girl decided that she could take advantage of this, and immediately turned to the maids and said that they should not have said such things, because if anyone heard them, they might be accused of disrespecting the imperial family. These words frightened the gossips to the point of horror. Smiling broadly, Aristana decided to pretend to be kind, and said that it would be unfair if the maids didn't at least know the truth, and offered to tell who that prince was loafing with, which interested the maids very much. So, the plan of the former princess succeeded. Now she was sitting with 3 maids, telling them the hottest gossip about the imperial family, and quietly drinking tea, thinking about how much noise she would make today, and that thanks to them, she would not have to worry about food for a while. Aristana decided to tell the gossip girls about Marquis Joseph Patello, and we learn his story. He is one of the most honorable businessmen in the empire, owns companies with gold mines, controls most of the railroads, and because of this, unmarried ladies treat him like a golden antelope, but he still hasn't married. Because of this, there are all sorts of rumors related to him, and they say that he has some kind of defect or that he is hiding hundreds of his mistresses. On learning that Aristana, who was now telling them gossip, had met the Marquis in person, the maids exclaimed in admiration, but the girl, remembering that he was no longer in the country when she claimed the throne, said she knew nothing about him, though she realized that she would get another piece of bread if she told them anything more about him. A few days later, the girl, pleased with her success, sat warming herself by the fireplace. As a result of selling information about aristocrats, she was able to stock up on food and befriend maids to bring her wood when she got cold. The girl was pleased with herself and her plan. Now she wouldn't need anything because of the aristocrat's constant inappropriate behavior, and maybe later she could even change that uncomfortable bed. However, looking at the fire in the fireplace again, the girl disappointedly wondered what she was even doing here, and that she shouldn't have come to a place like this to begin with. We learn Aristana's story. She was born in a small country on the edge of the Northern Empire and became part of the imperial family because of her divine power. As a girl, she was hesitant when thinking about her family, so the emperor also took her brother and mother, the head of the house, to the imperial palace, which those were very happy about. Aristana thought she could keep their happy family together if she tried, but soon her mother, driven mad by her daughter's new position, became extremely cruel, but her brother at the time still loved his sister. The situation worsened considerably when Zegwin left her, and she eventually lost the emperor's trust. She now had to admit that she had been so greedy that she only realized it after she had lost everyone who held her hands, and now she was sick of the imperial family. 3 years later, the princess was sitting in her room gazing wistfully out the window when the maid asked her to come out to clean her room. When only the cleaning ladies were left in the room, one of them, the new girl, noticed that Aristana always sat by the window thinking about something, to which the other replied that the reason for this was that she was a disgrace to the imperial family. The new maid, who found her partner's words too loud, whispered in dismay that the princess might hear their conversation, but the other one said with indifference that no one cared, and everyone was already talking about it, since the princess was doing nothing, even though she had been restored to status. After hearing all the words of the maids, the girl, sitting down on the sofa again and looking out the window, decided to remember her story, which we know thanks to her memories. She had been deposed and spent 2 years in a stable, and afterward had wasted a year since she had been restored to her status. Now she was forgotten by all and was so pathetic that one could not look at her without tears. Although only 2 years had passed, the emperor had no intention of returning her power, because after her return, there was nothing left of her importance, and for an incompetent member of the imperial family, the palace was like hell. Now Aristana sees no point in a bloody battle for the throne and has no choice but to leave this place. But as she watches the caged bird, she compares herself to it and realizes that the imperial family will not let it go until it dies, even though it is defective. Finishing her monologue, the girl lets the bird out of the cage into the open window, hoping that she too can leave the palace. Firmly determined to leave the imperial palace, she decided that if she couldn't get out of here on her own, she needed to make sure she was kicked out. Suddenly a maid entered the room and informed her that tea time was coming up and had come to help the princess get ready, to which she said it would be soon, at which time a plan emerged in her mind. Already at the afternoon tea party, the girl, sitting at the table, sadly realized that it was time to meet her brothers and sisters, with whom she usually does not cross paths, because after Zegwin's death, it had become an unpleasant event for her, because most of the imperial family despised her. Noticing that the cookies were dirty, one of the heroine's sisters irritably asked the servant to bring new ones, and Aristana, unpleasantly surprised by her behavior, deliberately took the cookies, which pissed off the other princess. After that, her face remained perfectly calm. She paid no attention to the fact that her sister was now swearing, and she reflected that it didn't matter that she was a pathetic insect who ranked 20th out of 20 successors, because right now, she just wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. Helena Iogrante, Empress of the Iogrante Empire, struck her spoon on her glass, drawing the attention of those present, and proudly thanked everyone for being here today. After making a few statements, she declared the meeting over. But Leon Iogrante, third in line of succession, displeasedly interrupted the Empress, saying that there were only 9 people, and she was just pretending not to see many empty seats. These words amazed everyone present, because usually no one could oppose the Empress. Aristana was the only one who remained calm, not reacting to the prince's antics. His remarks only made her lose her appetite, and she noticed that the atmosphere had deteriorated. The Empress, who clearly did not expect anyone to argue with her, quickly pulled herself together and dignifiedly replied that the others could not come for good reasons and Leon, as a brother, should understand them. The prince tisked, and the woman, without waiting for his reply, hurried out of the hall and promised to see him at dinner. Leon headed for the exit as well, noting that today's meeting had been awful as usual, and his siblings, amazed at what he had done, decided to follow him. Suddenly, the man who had been watching from the sidelines walked up to Aristana and loomed over her, angrily asking her how she dared to crawl out here and defy her brother Leon. Aristana, irritated by this attitude towards herself, noted that this was really getting beyond all bounds of decency and, continuing to drink her tea indifferently, decided to ignore her attacker. The one who was pissed off by the girls ignoring him bellowed at her, asking how dare she ignore him, and blushing with anger, knocked the cup out of her hands with a sharp movement of his hand. Aristana, who was still trying to keep her cool, calmly stated that she had just come here, kept quiet, and sat quietly without doing anything wrong. But the man was not to be changed, and replied hatefully that Leon wouldn't have behaved like that for no good reason, and what was more, he looked at her. The rest of the siblings, as usual, were just watching with a chuckle, as Nella Iogrante, the 14th princess of Iogrante, approached the arguing siblings and asked her brother to calm down, for her sister had done it unintentionally. Covering her face, which now bore a slight sneer, with a fan, she stated in a sweet voice that Aristana's very existence was like a balm on her eye, and that was probably why brother Leon had such a disgruntled expression on his face, so the man shouldn't worry too much about something so useless. Tired of all this ridiculous talk, an irritated Aristana got up from the table, and the prince, who had almost leveled her to the ground before, said with a smug grin that she was an embarrassment to their third mansion and shouldn't have come. As it turned out, she was the local madwoman. The girl, not wishing to answer him, simply left, and her sister Nella, noticing this, indignantly told her brother that she was simply leaving, which also greatly angered him. He, not wanting to let go of his hated sister so easily, grabbed her shoulder for you to hear him out, and proceeded to tell her that she should learn from him how to behave. After these words, Aristana, unable to bear such an insolent attitude towards herself, grabbed a teapot that was standing nearby and spilled all the contents on the aggressor, startling everyone present. Nella rushed to her injured brother's aid, and the heroine, standing where the third prince stood and looking down on them, said with a smirk that they all looked no better than an insect or maggot, and it was funny how lowly they were trying to seem better by talking badly about each other. Finishing that next time she recommended they talk to the third prince before he left, the girl was about to leave, but her brother, now doused with tea, was not willing to let her go so easily and tried to stop her. But the girl threw a chair at him, which shut him up completely, and left. Leaving the dining room and now walking down the corridor, Aristana remembered that the Empress's castle had a sleeping room for the heirs who would be attending the dinner, and realized that this was her chance to sleep in a good bed for at least one day. Going into the room, furnished with luxurious furniture, the girl lay down on the wide bed and thought with fatigue that in the evening when she went to dinner, she would have to listen to all this again. So if she wanted to be kicked out, it was best to make some scandal in a public place, for example, at dinner. We learned that a formal dinner is a big event where both members of the imperial family and high-ranking aristocrats gather in anticipation for a dinner party. After coming up with a plan, Aristana eagerly imagined what the aristocrats' reaction would be when they discovered the body of a member of the imperial family in the corridor, and thought that the soldiers would find her early and rescue her if she was lucky, and then she would be thrown out of the imperial palace for disgracing herself twice. As she continued to think about the plan, she also considered the option of failure. If she was unlucky, she would die, and at least she wouldn't have to go through this twice, and it wouldn't be so bad, though it would hurt. But if she could eventually get out of here, she'd have a chance at a normal life. When she looked up, she was surprised to see a guy with a book sitting in front of her, staring straight at her. Without taking his eyes off her, he calmly stated that her plan wasn't a good one, but he was here to talk to her about something, and the door was open. Addressing the girl by name, the guy with the amber eyes put his hand to his chest and honorably admitted that he really wanted to meet her. Aristana, who still didn't understand what was going on, impatiently suggested that he start by introducing himself and saying who he was. For of all the high-ranking aristocrats who could freely enter and leave the Empress's palace, there was no one she didn't know by sight. Remembering that there was only one person the maids longed for, she guessed that the stranger was the honorable rich man of the empire, the Marquis Joseph Patello, and wondered how the latter knew of her plan if this was the first time she had met him. The man, who didn't expect the girl to recognize him, proudly said he was honored and gently kissed her hand, formally greeting the heroine. Then, looking the princess in the eye, he regretfully told her that her plan would fail miserably, which once again amazed and angered her. Still not letting go of the girl's hand, the Marquis answered her next question, saying he would be sure to tell her about it, and offered to sit down, for his story might take a long time. Sitting down on the couch across from the girl, the guy began by saying that her plan would end up putting her on the throne, but it wouldn't be the life she dreamed of. However, Aristana didn't understand how that could happen if she followed her plan. Noticing that the girl didn't understand, the Marquis explained that the moment she tried to hang herself, the rope would break. She would fall, and it would leave a big scar on her chin and nose. Continuing his story, he said that after the scandal of the infamous suicide, her brothers and sisters would despise her even more, and she would take other steps to take out her anger and would not hesitate to kill her brothers and sisters, imprisoning all the people who laughed at her, and eventually she would take the highest position in the country. Having finished his story, the Marquis suddenly remarked that it was surprising, for no one would expect the disgrace of the imperial family to ascend the throne, but the girl, not sharing his emotions, thought angrily that he was mad. Not paying attention to the girl's reaction, he continued, saying that in the future opinions about her would be divided into two categories. Some would consider her a murderer who had massacred dozens of members of the imperial family, while others would consider her a tyrant who had glorified the empire. Closing his eyes, he regretfully informed her that she would still be able to raise her national prestige a bit, but she would end up being executed for tyranny and brutal murders, and such an end would be quite pathetic. Finally, Aristana, who couldn't listen to him any longer, interrupted him and said that she couldn't so easily believe everything he said, since he had just shown up and started talking about events that hadn't happened. At the look on her serious face, the Marquis recognized that he had been too hasty and asked the girl if she knew of the power of transmitting memories. When she heard this, she guessed at once that he meant to say that she possessed this power, and the latter, noticing this, noted her shrewdness. After figuring it out, he explained that he could share his memories with another person through light contact, and explained that the story he told her was not fiction, but had already happened. Noticing the girl's confusion after hearing this, the Marquis held out his hand to her, suggesting that she check for herself, and told her that if she didn't want to, she could chase him away and he would leave immediately. The princess, still not believing her interlocutor, assumed that he was playing with her. However, if it was only necessary to take his hand once, she had nothing to lose. At last she made up her mind to take his hand. A bright flash of light illuminated the room, and the heroine, closing her eyes, clung to the Marquis. He held her so that she would not fall, laid her gently on the bed, said that he thought she would certainly want to know the truth, and wished that the dream would be her last suffering. Having fallen into a dream, the girl sees a flashback from her memory. She is sitting in a dungeon when the Marquis is brought to her at her last invitation, who immediately asks the attendant to leave them alone. Sitting down on a chair in front of the sinner, he regretfully remarked that it was His Highness's order to execute the rebels, and bitterly recalled that he had told her to surrender and run away. But she had disobeyed him, for which she now apologized. The guy who regretted this outcome of the girl's life went on to say that he warned her, and she was in this situation because she ignored all his advice. In fact, he wanted to say more, that he would protect her even if he died. But he couldn't because they were overheard. With one last earnest but saddened look at Aristane, the Marquis put his hand to his breast, and wishing he could say it aloud, but unable to do so, hoped that some day would come when he could make that vow to her. The girl came to herself with horror, and seeing the Marquis sitting calmly before her and reading a book, remembered all she had just seen, and covering her mouth with her hand from shock, was horrified at what she had done. The guy, who wasn't even looking at her now, earnestly explained that she had turned the sacred imperial palace into a bloodbath and killed 1,000 innocent people. Hearing such a direct conclusion, Aristana agreed, and realized that this was what had led her to the outcome she had seen in her dream. Now, awake and face to face with him, she remembered the words he had spoken, and he looked at her again with the same tenderness he had before, took her hand, and said that he had looked forward to seeing her, and asked her to let him protect her, even if it led to death. The girl, amazed by the man's words, froze, and he asked to listen to his proposal, which again surprised the princess, who did not understand why he would do all this for her, but he really just wanted to help her. Noticing that the girl did not understand him, he explained that if she wished, she could even push the imperial family into the abyss, and he, regardless of whether he was a tyrant or an outstanding ruler, would fulfill her every wish as long as she lived and enjoyed life. Once again remembering how others had treated her, Aristana couldn't believe that for her sake, a man like Joseph Patello wanted to be her pawn, and looked at him angrily, and said he should find someone dumber if he wanted to cheat. Remaining calm, he took her hand again, and repeated with the same tenderness he had before that what mattered to him above all else was that she was alive, breathing and standing in front of him right now, and that was enough to make him start killing. The Marquis gently took her hand and looked at her with tenderness with his amber eyes, which very much amazed Aristana, who did not understand what he was doing and why he continued to look at her with such a look, and felt that she was gradually beginning to lose herself in this man. She felt sick. The girl, frightened by her new sensations, pushed the boy away, shouted angrily for him to go away, and that she never wanted to see him again, and ran out of the room, leaving him alone in bewilderment. She had lost so much time because of this madman. Dinner time approached, and Aristana sadly realized that she would not be able to miss it, for if she did not come, things would be worse, and plunged into wondering whether the future the Marquis had foretold her was real. The girl made an effort, and with sadness in her heart still went to the dinner, where as soon as she entered the hall, everyone turned in her direction and her side and began to whisper. Aristana thought that everyone was talking about her, but listening, she realized that they were discussing the relationship of a certain young girl and a 40-year-old emperor. Suddenly, Aristana felt someone sneaking up on her, and turning around sharply, she saw her brother, and told him hatefully that he was like a trained dog waiting for her, to come running to her at once as soon as she appeared. Her brother boiled with indignation upon hearing her words, and angrily accused the girl of having the audacity to speak such words only in a safe place in public. Noticing their altercation, Nella came up to them and condemned the girl for daring to speak to her brother like that under such a strict hierarchy, and asked her to stop defaming the good name of the imperial family. Aristana immediately rebuked Nella for talking too much after she had become her brother's henchwoman. They had a real fight, saying many insults to each other, and in anger, Aristana shouted at Nella not to come near her because of her bad breath. Nella flared up at her sister's words. The two continued their quarrel, Nella calling her sister ill-mannered and reproaching her for not heeding the advice to be careful what she said, and speaking nonsense again. Seeing that the quarrel had gone too far, the prince could not stand it, and decided to intervene, standing up for Nella and rebuking Aristana that her boasting had ended there, and she should politely apologize, and perhaps then he would turn a blind eye to the scandal. Aristana furrowed her eyebrows and shouted angrily that it wasn't her fault that her sister had bad breath. Nella became furious at her sister's words and screamed that she couldn't let her arrogance go any farther. The prince realized that the girl's behavior could not be left unpunished and announced that he was punishing her by confiscating half of the budget he had previously provided. But if she did show signs of remorse, he might change his mind. The girl found it amusing that she was about to have her already small budget cut in half, and her brother, with a victorious grin on his face, wondered what she was going to do now. Aristana came angrily up to him and in a moment splashed champagne from her glass in his face, which was a complete surprise to the prince, who immediately clutched his face with his hands. The startled Nella immediately ran up to him, supporting him under her arm while he came to his senses and wiped himself. Calmly placing the empty glass on the tray, Aristana grinned at her brother and wondered if he thought she couldn't do it a second time too. She was sorry he hadn't learned from his mistakes at all. She was then forced to turn at the voice of the suddenly appearing Marquis, who asked her with some resentment if this was really the only reason she had decided to leave him. Glancing at the Marquis, who had now respectfully placed his hand on his breast and was looking straight at her, Aristana irritably declared that she no longer wished to see him, but the latter, hesitating, replied that he had never heard the reason why she had refused his offer to be her knight. The other people in the room heard the guy's words and began to whisper worriedly that he must be trying to take advantage of her. After all, he is a very sneaky type. The brother who had attacked the girl during the last meeting was now whispering, and Sister Nella remarked that, judging from the situation, the Marquis had volunteered to be a knight, and Aristana had turned him down. Irritated by the guy's behavior, the girl didn't understand why she had to listen to all of this. After all, she had already told him to back off, so she turned around and walked away, throwing in one last thing, that there was no reason why she refused his offer to be her knight, and he should just stop bothering her. The Marquis, unwilling to give up so easily, was about to follow her. But suddenly the very brother whom Aristana had poured tea on last time stood before him and hurriedly apologized for the girl, who, in his opinion, had behaved disrespectfully to Patello. A smug smirk did not come off his face, as he said that the imperial family was also very concerned about the girl's behavior, and she was not fully aware of her place, and he was trying to teach her. The Marquis, unwilling to listen to such unfair speeches, interrupted the speaker, saying that he was trying to teach others what he himself did not realize. These words struck the prince. He did not expect such a reaction from the guy. Addressing him by name and looking at him as if he were going to kill him, Patello hatefully ordered the liar out of the way. Now the girl who had left the dining room stood on the balcony and looked out into the moonlit street. The evening wind fluttered her hair and plucked leaves from the trees. Finally, footsteps were heard, and the girl, without turning around, realized that the Marquis had come to her, and sighing, asked why he should not stop torturing her if he had a conscience. The boy, who was now unwilling to back down, pretended not to understand the meaning of her words, and declared that he was merely an admirer of Her Highness Aristana. His words infuriated the girl, and she asked why in that case he should not stop shamelessly bothering the man and give up. After all, she was not going to fight for the throne and become empress. The Marquis, surprised by her words, clarified whether she really did not believe what he had shown her, and admitted that he knew that the prince would decide to cut her budget. But the girl, still disappointed by what was happening, said that now, on top of everything, she would be haunted by rumors that the impertinent princess dared to refuse the Marquis's offer. Grabbing her hand, the guy earnestly stated that he knew this because he'd seen the future and that she should finally believe him by now, and after a little thought, suggested that he just wasn't good enough to be her knight. The girl, who now seemed to be beginning to believe him, asked if they had been close in the future he had shown her, to which Marquis replied that he would have shown her a completely different future if that had been the case. Looking at him, Aristana noted that his facial expression didn't seem to be a lie, but it was still hard to immediately believe, but realized that what he had shown her was indeed the real future, and the guy had indeed seen it. Hearing voices coming from the dining room greeting the arriving empress, Aristana hurried back indoors. She hadn't expected Her Majesty to show up at the end of dinner, and only now realized why no one had left. We learn that the Empress, in addition to her adoration for her biological child, Kilstein, was famous for her favoritism towards all heirs, and therefore spoke even to the heroine. Noticing the girl and the Marquis on the balcony, she called them to her and asked if she was disturbing them, to which the girl replied that they had already finished, but the Empress guessed from the expression on the boy's face that he obviously disagreed with the heroine. Turning to the Marquis, whom she had not expected to see here, the Empress asked what had brought him to dinner, to which he replied that he had come here to declare that he wished to become a knight, but had been rejected at once. Aristana, burning with shame, stood at ease and pretended that they had nothing to do with it, while the Empress at this time noticed that it seemed that the girl who refused his offer was very brave. The heroine guessed that the Marquis was up to something, but said nothing. And the Empress, who thought it unseemly for a third party to meddle in the affairs of a man and a woman, wished him good luck and withdrew. The girl, who had been angered by the conversation between the Marquis and the Empress, went out to the balcony again, and the lad followed her, and once more asked her to choose him, for he wanted her to sit on the throne and enjoy life. He did not want to let her go so easily. Aristana turned to him, and angrily exclaimed that she had already repeated many times that she did not agree to have him become her knight. The next day, the girl was talking at tea time with one of her sisters, the sixth Princess Madonia Iogrante, who now could not believe that she could have refused the Marquis, and said that if she had been in her place, she would have consented. Taking a sip of tea and placing the cup on the table, Aristana shut it, saying that she had better get straight to the point. Her interlocutor sighed and noted that the girl was very cold, but still held out the letter she was supposed to give her. We learn a little about Madonia. She was one of the few people who spoke to the heroine in this palace. She was the half-sister of Kilstein, who brought Aristana to this floor and was constantly sending her letters, ordering his sister to do what he wanted. At last the girl tore up another of his letters without thinking, and Madonia sighed, unsurprised by what was happening, and asked if she had really never read his letters, to which the girl replied that her interlocutor need not worry, for a torn letter would not harm her brother. With another frustrated sigh, the sixth princess asked Aristana not to be so sarcastic, and reminded her that she did this for a living. The girl agreed, remembering that they support Kilstein, because even if he is not the emperor, everyone bets on heirs who look like the emperor. After that, Madonia left, leaving the heroine a box of cookies, which she always hands to her as a symbol of compassion to calm her down. Left to herself, Aristana wondered what she had done with Kilstein and Madonia in the future, and suggested that she had probably killed the former. Now the girl was sitting on a bench in the garden and, thinking, remembered the conversation with Madonia, and wondered if in the eyes of her interlocutor she looked so grumpy. Thinking about Marquis's offer again, Aristana recognized that the only one who would suffer a loss from their agreement would be the boy, but that was why it seemed even stranger to her, for she knew that there was no such thing as sincere loyalty, and so she couldn't just take him at his word and trust him. However, remembering his words again, the girl had to admit that it wasn't as if he was lying or talking nonsense, but if what he was saying was true, it was becoming impossible to understand how she had become empress then, for he was hardly her knight then. At last her thoughts were interrupted by the Marquis, who suddenly approached her and, smiling at her in greeting, asked her what she was thinking so deeply about, to which she grudgingly replied that she had something to think about thanks to him. Not reacting to the fact that his companion was glad to know what she thought of him, the princess asked what had brought him here this time, to which he, not at all embarrassed by her cold tone, replied that he had heard that she was having another party with the other heirs today and had come to escort her there. The boy held out his hand to her, but the girl at first refused, saying that she could get there herself. But when she heard that the Marquis had already prepared a more comfortable and faster carriage and had prepared her favorite snacks, she agreed. She gave him her arm and allowed him to escort her to the carriage, but declared that she was only going with him because she might be late. And the Marquis, understanding everything perfectly, said that it was an honor for him to accompany her. Already seated in the carriage that her boyfriend had prepared, she ate the snacks prepared especially for her, and reflected on the fact that she had realized over the past 2 years that pride did not satisfy hunger. The Marquis was pleased that the princess enjoyed his snacks, and said he was sorry that his proposal didn't appeal to her as much as those cookies, hinting that taking the throne wouldn't be a problem if he became her knight. However, the girl remained adamant, and grinning, once again refused her companion's offer, much to his disappointment. He once again thought it was because she didn't believe him, but Aristana said that wasn't the case. She lowered her head sorrowfully and said that she had once tried to get a lot of things for herself and had enough reason to envy others, but she had lost it all in an instant, and the siblings she trusted had turned their backs on her in an instant, and the emperor didn't care about children who couldn't be used. At last, when she had finished her story, she confessed with weariness that she simply wanted to get away from here. On hearing this, the Marquis confidently declared that it was a foolish dream and that it must be obvious to her herself. Noticing that his words shocked Aristana, he explained that a person who once belonged to the imperial family would not be able to live a normal life among the common people, and even if she managed to escape, she would likely soon be arrested again for treason. A while later they arrived, and the guy, after another glance at her, added that the usual running away wouldn't solve the problem, and she should take his words as a warning. Upon entering the room where the meeting was to take place, Aristana noted that the atmosphere here was somewhat chaotic. She was distracted from studying the room by the cheerful voice of her brother, with whom she had already had an argument. He called her a sleepyhead, saying that they had waited for her for a long time, but in the end, without waiting, had already eaten without her. Aristana, not at all surprised by her brother's rebuke, immediately realized that she had been told the wrong time on purpose. Nella also accused the girl of being perpetually late, but she did not answer, sitting down next to another princess. Receiving no reply, Nella became angry and called Aristana's behavior vulgar and said that she should not have gone out with someone who was not her fiancé or knight. The girl took a cup of herbal tea without answering and soon stopped listening to what her sister was saying. But suddenly, she felt an unusual power. Still unable to figure out what was going on, Aristana snapped her fingers in a random guess, and the cup shattered into shards in Nella's hands, hurting her. On coming to his senses, the prince, who had hitherto stood by the injured woman, at once guessed that it was due to Aristan, and guessing that her power had returned to her, exclaimed that she had no right to do such a thing, for he had told her to think of her behavior, but she had abused the power and hurt her sister. The girl, who had had enough of her brother's idle chatter, shut him up by asking him why he should not buy the victim a new dress with the confiscated property. Stupidity is always conspicuous. He is the only one in the third mansion who has real power, but somehow dares to accuse her of being the cause of all the disturbances. The brother, wishing to change the subject quickly so that others would not know of his misdeeds, said that he knew the girl's strength was returning little by little, but he was immediately silenced by the suddenly appearing Marquis, who said that every time he met him, he was angry, and remarked with insincere regret that the herbal tea in their restaurant was not helping. The brother, noticing that the uninvited guest had sided with the girl, asked him to stay out of it because it was their family business. But Marquis, not wanting to give in, said that this was his restaurant, so they should pay extra if they wanted to hang out here longer. Then, noticing that Nella had hurt herself, with the same insincerity as before, he expressed his sympathy and said that he was responsible for the damage caused by the dishes in his restaurant, after which he dripped on her wound the blue dragon's tear that was in the vial he always carried with him, and the wound on the victim's arm immediately disappeared. Nella was embarrassed and grateful to Marquis, causing her to not immediately react to her irritated brother's order to get out of here. Realizing that the meeting of the siblings was over, the Marquis assumed that Aristana was also going back and offered to escort her. And in the meantime, the girl who sat with her at the table looked admiringly at Joseph and experienced unusual feelings. The Marquis took Aristane's hand and suggested that she should always call him for help if she needed help, but the girl informed him that she still hadn't changed her mind and thought he should have found a better person because he considered himself a laughingstock, and if he was with her, he would become one himself. The guy wouldn't listen to her because he always knew how to make decisions, never regretted his choice, and knew how to stand on his own. The girl was pissed off. She swore quietly, turned around, and left the room, wondering why he wouldn't give up, even if she had warned him nicely. What else she needed to do to make him back off for good? There was a knock at the door and a woman's voice called out to Aristant. It was Sister Ilya, who asked to enter Aristant's room. The girl said hello, and Ilya, a little embarrassed, said that she wanted to ask her sister something. Aristana approached the girl, looking questioningly at her, and Ilya asked if the Marquis of Patello had become her knight. Aristana's fists clenched and her lip bitten. She shouted angrily that it wasn't true, though she guessed why such talk was going on. Ilya crossed her arms over her chest and asked hopefully if it was true that she and Marquis had no relationship with each other. And Aristana confirmed it again. Ilya thought dreamily, for it was no wonder they didn't have a relationship, for Marquis really was too good for a sissy, as she had always thought, whereupon Ilya ran happily to her room. Aristana was confused by this visit of her sister with strange questions. She wondered if she had really come just for that, and didn't realize if she liked it all or not, but decided to banish those thoughts and rest without thinking about anything. The next day, Aristana decided to go to the cemetery to visit her brother's grave. As she approached the tombstone where her brother was resting, she ducked her head and thought about the fact that there were no traces of the place now, as if everything had been washed away by the rain and wind, and it was impossible to believe that it had not all been deliberately organized. Standing at her brother's grave, she couldn't say she felt sorry for him. She just wanted to honor his memory and look after the headstone, unlike her mother's grave where she never went willingly. She wasn't going to be sentimental anymore. Suddenly someone called Aristana's name, and she turned around sharply in surprise to see Keelstein standing behind her with a huge bouquet of white lilies. The girl was not very happy at this meeting, and Riley remarked that the prince's face did not express the least bit of shame, to which her brother replied with a chuckle that he was glad to see her too. She was truly outraged that he had dared to come to her brother's grave, but he tried to calm her by saying that he had come with pure intentions and only wanted to honor his memory. Aristana was furious, for she thought it was a lie, for he had killed him with his own hands and now decided to make fun of a dead man. Aristana hurriedly left the place, for she could not bear these lies any longer, and Keelstein had time to ask her why she had not even looked at his letters. For a moment, slowing her step, the girl blurted out that she should not have read them, for they were letters from her brother's murderer, who had taken everything from her. The girl stopped. Her eyes were throwing lightning bolts, and she angrily asked if it wasn't enough for him to be hypocritical in front of the dead. But Keelstein, ignoring her displeasure, asked to be allowed to clarify, and said that he hadn't killed Zegwan. He took a white envelope out of his coat pocket and handed it to the girl. Many times he had tried to send letters to her through Madonia, but nothing had worked, because Aristana had torn them up every time, and these were letters for her from her brother Zegwan. Aristana snatched the envelope out of the boy's hands and crumpled it up. Seeing this, Keelstein asked perplexedly what she was doing, for it was the last letter from her brother and had to be read. Keelstein begged the girl not to tear up the letter, and for the sake of her brother's memory, to read it. Aristana stopped when she heard this. Tears began to flood her face, and bringing the crumpled envelope to her face, she opened it and took out the letter. The letter was written in his brother's beautiful handwriting, which his sister easily recognized, and was addressed to "My little sister, Aristana." In the letter, his brother thanked her for being able to live in the imperial palace and admitted that he understood that it was not easy for her to live there, in competition with the outstanding heirs, but he was sure that her talent and efforts could not be surpassed by anyone. Zegwan was sure that he was just an easy prey in the castle and was even afraid to go near it because he was not a successor, and that's when he met Keelstein, who turned out to be a good friend, protecting unlike all the others. Zegwan admitted that he was able to survive in the imperial family only thanks to her, his sister. Zegwan had become very good friends with Keelstein, who always helped him with any problems, and they often discussed how to help her hold her ground, but unfortunately, he realized that he couldn't help her himself and was just the ballast that was dragging her down. Keelstein didn't see it that way and disagreed with his brother's stance, but Zegwan still decided to stay away from his sister, lest he end up becoming her weakness. It was the only way to force distance from him, albeit a very harsh one. This decision hurt his sister and made her feel even more alone, so his brother asked to never forgive him for it and thanked him for everything she had done for him and Mom. He wanted to take care of her out of the shadows for her own good. Aristana's tears flowed as she read the lines. It was his handwriting, it was really a letter from him, and when she finished the letter, she was left puzzled. Now she didn't understand who had really killed Zegwan. The girl ran away in anger, and Keelstein, who had hurried to catch up with her, shouted that there was no point in shouting and raving now, and it was necessary to first develop the strength to fight back, and finding the real culprit was the next step. Aristana, stunned by what she had just learned, asked Kilstein why he had told her that she had had her wings ripped out as a result if he had been at her brother Zegwan's side the whole time. To which he nonchalantly replied that he had only done it because she needed motivation so she could move on. But that method, as he had thought, had not worked. Never giving her any clues to find the culprit, the guy said he would wait and promised to be at her side to find the real killer. Already in the house, the girl, left to herself, angrily decided that she could not believe him, because it could not be that all the years he had purposely treated her so rudely for her benefit, and she, it turns out, all this time was angry with the wrong person. In fact, those who had benefited from Zegwan's murder had stripped her of her will and her place as successor, which meant that the murderer was one of the successors. Guessing, she panicked at the realization that there were too many suspects. Suddenly, Marcus came up behind her and, noticing her in such a state, grabbed her hand and apologized for disturbing her, confessing that he had been calling for her and she had not heard him again because she was hovering somewhere. He noticed the cut on her arm and again sweetly declared that he belonged to her, even if he was not the cause of his torture. But Aristana, who was already tired of such speeches of the Marquis, asked if he was not tired of constantly coming to the princess, who wanted nothing to do with him. The guy, expecting such an answer, obediently closed his eyes and patiently reminded that he would be more than happy if the girl accepted him, and said that only she was his mistress, which greatly surprised the heroine, who hoped that he had already given up. Wondering if he could be trusted, Aristana noted that he was a suspicious, brash, stubborn man she didn't know that well, yet he only had eyes for her, and those words of his about making her empress of this empire made her doubtful. Still not releasing her hand, the Marquis looked her straight in the eye and, smiling, promised that he could be of service to her and would do whatever she wished if she would have him today. Aristana thought about it. This was truly her last chance, one she might not have again, and agreed, abruptly grabbing him by the shirt and pulling him to her. She had decided to use Marquis to complete her revenge. The guy, who actually didn't expect to receive a positive response so abruptly, stiffened without answering anything, and the girl, letting him go, promised that he would have a hard time if he really decided to help her rise from disgrace of the imperial family to empress. Looking into his eyes, the distraught girl said that it was too late to back up now, for she had already chosen him, and the man, laughing, knelt before her and said without a shadow of doubt that she was right, and he would give her everything he had, and asked her to crush them all and climb to the top. He pressed again upon her arm and said that he was honored to serve her. But the girl, who was already sick of such sugary words, shut him up by saying that he had better not be so insolent from now on if he wanted her to remain with him, and he, not at all embarrassed by the rudeness of his chosen one, bowed respectfully and promised that he would bear it in mind. Aristana, who was about to leave, turned around and reminded him with her former seriousness that the only thing left for him to do was to take the oath of a knight. A while later, the Marquis and Aristana were already standing at Pandora's altar, when the girl noticed with displeasure that everything was happening too fast, as if he had prepared for everything in advance, and remembered that he had even dragged her to the Empress to make her a witness to their deal, even though Aristana was against it. Finally, the Marquis proposed to begin, and the Master of Ceremonies began the speech by saying that before the oath, the two of them would reveal themselves to the High Priest without lying. From the host's speech, we learn that they must swear to dedicate their body and mind to the Empire, to defy whoever encroaches upon it by joining each other's forces as to take responsibility, and if either party breaks the oath, by the force of the oath, the traitor will be burned to death. The speech came to an end, and Aristana and Marquis were asked to exchange the sign of their oaths to seal each other's vows. But the girl had nothing to offer as a gift because she had completely forgotten about this tradition. Trying to extricate herself from the awkward situation, she declared, ahead of Marquis, that they had a contract to replace the signs. On hearing this, the lad looked away disappointedly and said that she had just trampled on his fantasy. Ignoring the misunderstanding, the host announced that they could now swear to each other in front of the great Pandora. The first to take his oath was Marquis, who, kneeling down and kissing her hand, promised that he would always be immensely devoted to the girl and would serve her always. The worried host, who didn't expect that the guy didn't know how to swear properly, embarrassedly informed him that he should swear to the Empire and not the princess. But the guy smiled carelessly and said that he would serve the Empire as long as he served Her Highness. Doubting that the boy's words could be considered an oath, the host decided not to argue, and turning his attention back to himself, declared the knight's oath valid, and ended his speech by saying that the great Pandora would watch over them always and everywhere. With that, Aristana felt the power of the powerful oath quickly begin to spread through her body, and a warning sounded in her head that death was the only price for betrayal. Looking at Marquis, who was now standing straight and looking somewhere in the distance, the girl thought that perhaps he had heard and felt the same thing, and returning to her own thoughts and feelings, reminded herself again that this was the second chance of her life and she must not put it down. Holding the Marquis's hand, Aristana thought dreamily that now she was really in the same boat as him, and she could not say that she did not like him. But now she could enjoy his boundless wealth and no longer worry about money. Aristana still needed to clarify one thing, so she asked Marquis what he wanted and for what he became her knight, and Marquis remained thoughtfully silent for a long time, until this silence began to piss Aristana off. The Marquis clasped the girl to him and said fervently, looking fixedly at her, that he had fallen in love with her at first sight, and that he was ready to give her anything she wished. The girl thought over these words and decided that she could use them to her advantage. Aristana offered to get down to business immediately and discuss their contract. The Marquis handed the girl the bundle, and she ran through all the clauses of the contract, and only now felt that it all looked real, and tried to imagine the expressions on the faces of her siblings when they found out that she had made the Marquis her knight. Aristana finished the sheet carefully, found no mistakes in it, and turned to Marquis. She thought she would look mercurial at this moment, but still decided to ask the lad a question and arrange everything with him on shore. She demanded that her room be filled with the finest goods, jewelry, gems, furniture, and so on, before breakfast tomorrow, figuring it was the most effective way to break the news to her family. The Marquis, kneeling before her, kissed her hand and promised to make everything in the best possible manner, so that anyone would be speechless at the mere sight of her and her room, and he promised to make her bed especially splendid. At this point, the knight's oath was complete. All the notarized documents were prepared, and now that the Marquis had truly become her man, the girl had only one thing to do: simply return the power to her hands. The next morning, Aristana went into her room and marveled. The Marquis had really prepared everything in such a short time. She hadn't expected him to do it in a few hours, but she liked it very much. A little later, the boy's servant entered the room, greeting the girl and asking if she liked the items. Aristana raved about the transformed room, saying she was very surprised by it, and expressed her sincere gratitude for the wonderful items. The Marquis's servant handed her an envelope, saying it was from the Marquis for her. The girl eagerly took it and opened it, seeing inside an unlimited certificate for use in any store, saloon, hotel, and any other place in their street. Aristana was amazed and wondered if there was a single business company in the country that her fiancé Patello's family didn't have a hand in. Now that at last everything was ready, the room shone with decorations, and there was only waiting, when suddenly there was a sudden knock at the door, and Aristane was told that she was urgently summoned by the Empress. The girl, terribly confused, could not understand what had happened and why she could be summoned, and with horror assumed that the rumor had already spread that the Marquis had become her knight. It turned out that the Empress had summoned the girl because Her Highness Swan, the 12th princess, had been attacked. The girl didn't understand how it happened and what it had to do with her, but she didn't have time to think about it. She had to hurry up and come to the Empress as soon as possible. Gathering herself in a short time, the girl rushed in and was told to enter. The Empress and Princess Swan were sitting in the room, and Aristana entered and inquired if the princess was all right and unhurt by the attack. Swan jumped up from her chair and pulled her skirt up to her knee, exposing her tightly bandaged leg. Fiercely approaching Aristana, she asked her if she had ordered the maid to break her ankle. Aristana erupted at such a ridiculous accusation and asked Swan how she could stand so confidently if her ankle was broken. Swan confusedly stated that she felt a burning pain and ordered Aristana to disinfect her ankle. Her Majesty, hearing that a maid had done all this, immediately ordered her to be summoned. The frightened maid confirmed that she had done so at Princess Aristana's request. Aristana was perplexed at being slandered, but kept her cool as she realized she was only dealing with an idiot, Princess Swan, who was now asking to disinfect her fracture because her ankle hurt. Princess Swan continued her comedy, whimpering pitifully, wondering how she could have been treated and harmed in such a way. She screamed hysterically at Aristana, demanding an answer as to whether she had wanted a place in the second mansion and had set up the whole thing. There was an altercation between the girls. Swan did not let Aristana say anything or even let her get a word in edgewise. Aristania was puzzled that she had not even been engaged a day since her and Marquise's engagement and had already been set up. Yet Swan was running around the room with her injured leg, oblivious to her fracture. The Empress, who had been sitting in the room all this time and who had been listening attentively to the girls' scolding, abruptly cut them short and asked them to listen to her carefully. After waiting for silence, she declared that the accused did not know this maid, and the latter added that she had not even known Princess Swan until that moment, and that this was the first time they had greeted each other. Swan immediately tried to object, blurting out that Aristana was just trying to get out of that filthy third mansion and was jealous of her, to which Aristana called her maid over and asked her to tell her what her room looked like. The maid confirmed that the room was luxurious and no one even in the second mansion had such a room. Aristania turned again to the maid, asking if she was like a penniless princess who, blinded by the desire for power, would murder her sister for the sake of luxury, and if her life in the third mansion was so miserable that she might wish to take Swan's place. The maid was frightfully silent, her eyes downcast. Aristana, realizing that she would not expect an answer from the maid, turned to the maid, who blamed it on her, to answer when she had personally ordered Swan to be harmed. The maid replied that it was the day the successors went to the Marquis Patello's restaurant. Aristana sensed the conspiracy and decided to ask, for the purpose of verification, what flowers grew in that courtyard. The maid was confused and after a little hesitation answered incorrectly, but when given a second chance to answer, she missed again. Aristana said that she had been with the Marquis that day in the gallery, where they had agreed on something before the oath, and many people had seen her coming and going that day. Whereupon Aristana shouted out in anger that the Marquis was now her knight, and she could call him as a witness. The heroine threatened the terrified maid that she could face the death penalty for false testimony, and it was easy to lose value here. Her Majesty's loud voice interrupted the uproar. She had heard enough to understand and deal with the situation and asked everyone to stop swearing. Calling Swan to her, she said that she would pretend that nothing had happened, but on the condition that Swan would not leave the mansion again and would not waste any more of the Empress's time on such things from now on. After stupid Swan was dragged away, the Empress asked everyone to leave and began to ask Aristana about Joseph, but since she was not so close to him, she had nothing to tell, so soon she lost interest in the subject. Then the Empress proposed to annul the girl's marriage to the Count, assuring her that His Majesty would also be glad of Aristana's return, though the girl doubted whether he still remembered her. But the Empress assured her that he was always waiting for new waves to come high and shake up the haughty and reckless successors of the first mansion. The Empress liked revenge as a goal. His Majesty wanted the most powerful heir to the throne, and if Aristana could prove she was the best, she had to do it. As she left the hall, she had to admit that she hated the Emperor, and she realized it after she had hit rock bottom. No matter how well she didn't stand a chance against the will of the Emperor, who used her as an example to instill a sense of fear in her immediate family. Remembering the Emperor's attitude towards her, the girl realized that she had no desire to challenge the Emperor again, but as she tiredly fell onto her luxurious bed and rested her face against it, she suddenly realized that today would definitely spread a rumor about an emperor who had been locked up in the mansion, even though in her opinion, it was not a particularly harsh punishment. Staring off into the distance, Aristana thought about the fact that the event that had happened today would probably shock the brothers of that arrogant first mansion, and it would be very amusing.